Let's talk about the majority of these 15%. How about these, if the 15% number is anything close to accurate? What are these Christians like? I would describe these Christians, these young Christians, very much like a recent book that David Platt wrote. Radical. Radical. This is a generation that has very few Christians, but those who are Christians are demonstrating their faith in a way that perhaps our nation has not seen in over 100 years. That has many different manifestations. Among the Christians in this generation, more are eager to go to the nations to share the gospel of Christ. More are desirous to get out of the comfort of the walls of their church buildings and to go into the community and to be salt and light in the community. And in something that maybe should not have been a surprise to us, but how overwhelming it was, this is a generation that desires deep, deep biblical study. And I'm talking about those who are Christians. I recently saw a manifestation of this. In fact, it was last weekend. I mentioned David Platt in his New York Times bestseller called Radical, which one of the reasons it's a New York Times bestseller is because the millennials are buying this book and saying, I identify with who he says Christians should be. But I went to his church last weekend on a Friday night. I had to get the pastor, David Platt, to get me into the church because the demand to come to this church is so high they have to give first come, first served tickets because they don't have enough room. And on this particular Friday night, they had sold out the 3,000 tickets online in 7.5 minutes. Now, what were these primarily young people coming to? They arrived at 6 p.m. on a Friday night to study the doctrine of ecclesiology, and they did not leave till almost 1 a.m. I sat through the whole blooming 7 hours. It about killed me. In my opinion, nobody's that good. I mean, just think how restless you are for me being up here an hour. Think about a good speaker, though, for almost 7 hours. They came with a 100-page workbook, and they went through every page of the workbook. And when he asked for the people who were a member of his church to stand up, only about 10% stood up. When he just asked them to stand from different states, over 30 states were represented. 3 different countries were represented. It came just for this, what he calls the secret church, where they study deep into Scripture, and in this particular case, for almost 7 hours. This is a generation that is very few in number Christians, but this is also a generation that among the Christians, I think they'll change the world. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm reticent to go back over 2,000 years, but at the same time I am tempted to, or around 2,000 years. And to go to the early church, and to go where there were a handful of Christians that then became 120, then became thousands. And to see that story in the book of Acts of how the spontaneous expansion of the church began with a few Christians who were radically committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I came away from studying the millennials from a cultural perspective discouraged. I came away from my study of the millennials from a church number perspective discouraged. But I came away after listening to the Christians, the roughly 15% of these 78 plus million, motivated, encouraged, and hopeful, believing that they truly might just turn the world upside down. And it only takes a few and the power of the Spirit to do so.